Part 15. After Xiao Fubao's life was stolen, she became the favorite of the Beijing group. Author, Muyun Shenshen. Chapter 141. Niu Niu did not agree immediately. Instead, she looked at Gu Zhao and said, "Mom has been protecting me. I didn't get caught in the rain when I got off the carriage. Third brother's hair is wet, so let third brother wash it first." The mother-in-law was anxious and couldn't understand why everyone was so humble. She couldn't help but cast her expectant eyes on Gu Zhao, hoping that he would also be humble. But Gu Zhao couldn't read her eyes. Gu Zhao didn't want to do his homework at all, and he was not humble at all when he heard this. He suppressed his joy and said, "Brother, since my sister said so, I won't be polite." The old woman clenched and unclenched her fists, but said nothing. She honestly carried the hot water to the room next to her. However, Gu Zhao was not honest when taking a bath. He was thinking about procrastinating for a while, and he didn't really want to do his homework, just like staying in the bathtub. "Young master, the water is getting cold, let's get up first," the old woman said in a good voice. Gu Zhao rolled his eyes and said, "My back feels very dirty, and my hair has not been washed. I rub it again and again." The mother-in-law could only lower her head and continue to wash the child reluctantly. After finally scrubbing the person from head to toe, she thought the torture was about to end, but she didn't expect that Gu Zhao leaned back. "Mother-in-law, if you have anything else to do, go ahead and I'll lie down." Anyway, for Gu Zhao, as long as he doesn't write big characters, he is happy with anything he does. When the old woman heard this, she couldn't help clenching her fists. Gu Zhao hadn't washed her well, so how could she help Niu Niu take a bath? After all, there was only a shallow bathtub for children in the living room. "Young master, if you think there is something unclean, I will rub it for you again. The water is not hot anymore, so there is no need to soak in it all the time." The old woman could hardly remember how many times she had said this. However, Gu Zhao acted as if he didn't understand the hint and said, it's okay. The water is still hot for me. I'll get dressed when I'm done washing." "Mother-in-law, you don't have to stay here all the time." Seeing that the hint was useless, the old woman could only say, "Young master, your sister hasn't taken a bath yet. Old lady, I'll go get some hot water first and prepare it for her." After the old woman finished speaking, without waiting for Gu Zhao's reaction, she turned around and carried the bucket to the big kitchen. Because of Mr. Li's extra instructions, there was still hot water on the stove in the kitchen. The old lady filled it with hot water as soon as she came, and then walked along the corridor into the guest house. When she came in, Gu Yan was also urging Gu Zhao. "Diligence leads to work, but playfulness leads to waste. It will never take you so long to take a bath at home," Gu Yan said with a solemn face. Gu Zhao lowered his head and whispered, "Brother, I want to hang out for a while." Gu Yan was not polite, took a book, grabbed a chair and sat on the edge of the tub, and started reading into his brother's ear. This sound that sounded like a demonic sound made Gu Zhao's mind buzz. "Brother, stop reading, I'll get up right now." Gu Zhao hurriedly wiped himself and got dressed in a hurry. The old woman happily stepped forward to help. She finally filled the bucket with hot water again and ran next door to urge Niu Niu to take a bath. But Niu Niu still shook her head and said, "It's my turn. His clothes are wet. He should have changed his clothes long ago." "Old woman, why are you so humble again?" The old woman wanted to curse. She couldn't help but wonder if Niu Niu knew something. She felt as if she was being played at will by this family. Gu Yan waved his hand and was about to say no, but the next second his nose suddenly itched and he couldn't hold it back. "Ah, sneeze." Niu Niu's eyes were filled with worry immediately and she said, "Brother, go and take a hot bath. I haven't been touched by the rain at all, and my body is as strong as a calf." Gu Yan couldn't help laughing and said, "You are a little girl, And you don't mind saying anything you say like a calf. While he was talking, his nose became itchy again, and he couldn't help but sneeze 3 times in a row. He was like this. After all, he no longer showed humility to his sister. But when he entered the small room to take a shower, he muttered in a low voice, "You were fine just now, why did you suddenly start sneezing?" Guyan was older and already had a stronger awareness of men and women. He did not let the old woman take care of him, but took clean clothes and took a bath himself. The old woman stood outside the door holding a wooden bucket filled with hot water. The more she thought about it, the more unwilling she became. Even though she had been used to physical labor all year round, it was not easy for her to lift this large bucket of hot water. She rolled her eyes and shouted to Guyan, who was taking a bath in the cubicle, "Master, I'm going to the kitchen to boil water now. I'll wait for you to finish washing in a while, so I can wash the little lady." Her purpose in saying this was simple. After experiencing the previous incident of Guzale being unable to get up from the bathtub, she was afraid that Guyan would also have this bad habit. When Guyan in the cubicle heard this, he immediately sped up his movements. The old woman returned to the kitchen with the wooden bucket and immediately urged, "Hurry up, the guest room is waiting for hot water." The servant in charge of boiling water in the kitchen couldn't help complaining, "Although I have told you to be careful, the people in the guest house are too rude. They use water so fast, how can I boil it?" The old woman had something in her mind, so she naturally didn't dare to defend herself, so she could only come forward to help with the work, and said, "I just need this bucket of hot water urgently, and I won't bother with the rest." The servants in the kitchen reluctantly added firewood to the earthen stove to make the fire burn brighter so that the water could heat up faster. With the constant help and urging of the old woman, the pot of water finally heated up. She hurriedly poured the water into the bucket, and then hurried back. The kitchen servant looked at her hurried back and couldn't help muttering, "Strange, this old woman is usually cunning, but today she is very active." The old woman carried a full bucket of hot water, and her mind was only thinking about Li Yuanwai's 1 or 2 taels of silver. Her monthly salary was only 2 chien of silver, and now she could get 1 or 2 taels of silver just by looking at the birthmark on the girl's arm. Naturally, she was very active. Counting carefully, this was her 3rd trip with a full bucket of water. She felt that the wooden bucket was getting heavier and heavier. For 1 or 2 taels of silver, the old woman even used all her strength, and veins on her forehead burst out because of excessive force. She arrived at the guest house with a wooden bucket in sweat, and she was so tired that she felt that everything in front of her was distorted. Hot water is here, I will help the young lady bathe," the old woman said stubbornly. Guyan had just finished bathing and changing clothes. Sun Jiaxing, who was originally accompanying the children, also returned to his room, and was replaced by Zhang Yuniang. Because Gu Mingda was out, Zhang Yuniang did not stay in the same room with Sun Jiaxing for the sake of avoiding suspicion. Zhang Yuniang took Guyan's hand at this time, checked up and down, and asked, "Ian, Na Yunio said you might have caught a cold. Where do you feel uncomfortable? Do you have to tell me? Dizzy? Is your body cold?" Guyan shook his head and said, "Mom, after bathing, my son is much better. Now he doesn't even sneeze." Zhang Yuniang breathed a sigh of relief and turned to look at the old woman who came in with a wooden bucket, and said, "Please change the water in the bathtub." The old woman's eyes began to spin, but she still insisted on entering the house, pouring out Guyan's bath water, and forcing herself to fill it with clean hot water. "Young lady, it's your turn to bathe." I will serve you," the old woman said while resisting the discomfort. First update. After Xiao Fubao's life was stolen, she became the favorite of the Beijing group. Author, Muyun Shen. Chapter 142. Zhang Yuniang glanced at her and said, "Old sister, don't bother you with this little thing. I'll wash it for her. Please go and boil a bucket of water and give it to Lord Sun later. Zhang Yuniang also handed the old woman 3 copper coins in a very polite manner. The old woman looked at the 3 copper coins and thought of the 1 or 2 taels of silver promised by Li Yuanwei. She opened her mouth and was about to say something, but suddenly her eyes went dark and her body fell to one side uncontrollably. Old sister? Old sister, Zhang Yuniang shouted hurriedly. Guyan took 2 steps forward and helped the old woman up. Even though the old woman was not conscious, she still stretched out her hand and said to Zhang Yuniang, let me serve, the young lady. Zhang Yuniang didn't think much about it when she heard this. She just thought that the old woman was only thinking about work. She couldn't help but mutter that the rules of this wealthy family were really good. The old woman of such an old age was still so diligent. Old sister, please sit down and rest for a while, and calm down. Zhang Yuniang comforted her, and helped her sit on a chair beside her. The old woman was still thinking about helping Niu Niu take a bath, but just when she wanted to move, she found that she had no strength in her body, so she could only watch Zhang Yuniang pull Niu Niu into the small compartment. The old woman was outside listening to the sound of the bathing water in the room, and tried to rush in several times, but just as she moved, her whole body fell to the ground uncontrollably. Bang! Her forehead hit the ground heavily, and Gu Zhao and Gu Yan, who were beside her, felt pain when they heard the sound. In the eyes of the 2 children, the old woman's forehead swelled up as big as a baby's fist in a few breaths, which looked very scary. Gu Yan wanted to help her, but the old woman's body was as heavy as a mountain, and he could only help her sit on the ground with all his strength. Please wait for a moment. When my mother finishes bathing my sister, she will call someone to help you go back, Gu Yan said. The young boy's politeness and thoughtfulness were seen as easy to talk to by the old woman. She took the initiative to say, young master, help me in. I want to help your sister take a bath. Gu Yan sighed and said, why are you doing this? You are in this state, and you are still thinking about it. As Gu Yan spoke, his eyes suddenly became alert. It was just to help with the bathing, but the old woman's behavior was too abnormal, as if she had some ulterior motives. After thinking for a moment, Gu Yan asked, mother-in-law, you are so eager to go in and help. Does the master have any special instructions? Don't worry, even if the master asks, we will speak well of you. After the old woman bumped into a big bump, her head became more dizzy. She felt dazed when she heard Gu Yan's voice, as if she was in a dream. People in dreams are not very defensive about everything. I have to go into the house, see the birthmark. The old woman said stumblingly. Gu Yan's eyes instantly became sharp. Niu Niu came home last year, and he still remembered the disturbance at home that day. After seeing the birthmark on Niu Niu's arm, Grandma went against all odds to adopt Niu Niu. Although he didn't know why the old woman wanted to see the birthmark, Gu Yan instinctively felt that he couldn't let her do what she wanted so easily. He suppressed his displeasure and asked the old woman, mother-in-law, why do you want to see the birthmark? The old woman was confused and still not on guard at all. Master ordered, to see, give 1 or 2 silvers. Gu Yan's fists clenched instantly. Why does he care about this kind of thing? Gu Yan continued to ask. The old woman said, I don't know anything about the master's family. Those who care about Niu Niu's birthmark are probably related to her life experience. Gu Yan couldn't help but guess in his heart, is Niu Niu the lost child of the Li family? He just looked at the luxurious furnishings that were obviously not suitable for a country family, as well as the large green-tiled courtyard. The Li family was obviously not short of money, so why did they lose Niu Niu? They hadn't been looking for her in all these years? Perhaps because he didn't want his sister to leave the Gu family, it was difficult for Gu Yan to speculate about the Li family with good intentions. He could still hear the sound of water in the house, accompanied by the laughter of the mother and daughter in the inner room. He had noticed the abnormal state of the old woman a long time ago, and quickly made a decision, whispering in the old woman's ear, "The young lady of the Gu family has no birthmark on her body, no birthmark." He didn't know if such a hint would work. Now he didn't know what the situation of the Li family was, and he couldn't let his sister get involved. Seeing that he couldn't ask more about the old woman, Guyan simply didn't bother to care about her, got up and walked to the table next to him. After leaving him, the old woman almost rushed to reincarnate, and fell to the ground sideways. Another heavy dong. Gu Zhao wanted to help her, but was stopped by Guyan. When his elder brother asked questions just now, Gu Zhao did not eavesdrop, but took out the cricket hidden in his purse and played with it for a while. He did not pay attention to the conversation between the two at all. At this time, he could not help but ask, "Brother, should we not help her?" Guyan shook his head and said, "We can't keep staring at her. If we help her, she will fall to the ground again. It's better not to do anything." Gu Zhao thought about it, nodded, and said, "That's right, lying on the ground will not cause any harm." The old woman really lay on the ground quietly. She felt that countless scenes flashed before her eyes like a revolving lantern, as if she had experienced a lifetime in a short time. After helping Naiyuniu take a bath, Zhang Yuniang took the little girl to open the door. She was shocked to see a person lying on the ground. After seeing clearly, she immediately looked at Guyan with an inquiring look. "If you help her up, she will fall to the ground." "It's better to lie down," Guyan said casually. Her eldest son has always been a well-behaved and sensible child. Zhang Yuniang didn't think much about it after hearing this, but stepped over the old woman. "You lie down first, I'll call someone to help you." After saying this, Zhang Yuniang ran to the gate of the yard to call for people. But the other old woman who was originally responsible for serving in the guest house didn't know where she ran to at this time. Zhang Yuniang turned around and saw that the old woman who was lying on the ground like dead suddenly sat up, and she didn't seem to be as weak as before. The old woman asked, "Did I help the young lady bathe just now?" Just as Zhang Yuniang was about to answer, Guyan said first, "Yes, you just helped my sister bathe." The old woman's face lit up. She thought she had just dreamed, but it turned out to be true. She just couldn't figure out why her head hurt so much. She remembered the silver in her heart, struggled to get up, and didn't even take the 3 copper coins, stumbling towards the main courtyard. Zhang Yuniang looked at her back and felt that it was not appropriate. She couldn't help shouting, "Old sister, please walk slower." As soon as Zhang Yuniang finished speaking, the old woman tripped over her left foot and fell flat on her face, which scared Zhang Yuniang again. The old woman had a big cut on her forehead, but she didn't take it seriously. She got up and shook her body and continued to run towards the main courtyard. "This old woman, why don't you want the bucket for hot water?" Zhang Yuniang muttered in a low voice. Guyan naturally understood why the old woman was anxious. He glanced at Gu Zhao and Naiyuniu, told them to continue writing big characters, and then pulled Zhang Yuniang into the inner room. The door of the inner room was open. Guyan found a position where he could see Naiyuniu and Gu Zhao in the outer room, and said to his mother in a low voice, "Mom, Mr. Li may be my sister's biological father." The second update. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. After Xiao Fubao's life was stolen, she became the favorite of the Beijing group. Author, Muyun Shenshen. Chapter 143. After these words came out, Zhang Yuniang was so scared that she couldn't hold the things in her hands. She knew that if Naiyuniu found her biological parents, it would be a good thing for her to have another pair of parents who loved her. But when the incident really happened in front of her, her first reaction was to run, taking Naiyuniu away. Zhang Yuniang had no other daughters. In her heart, Naiyuniu was the best girl. She forced herself to calm down at this time and said, "Tell me everything in detail. Why do you have such an idea?" Guyan told her everything that had just happened. After listening to him, Zhang Yuniang's heart was suddenly twisted. It can't be so coincidental, there must be some misunderstanding. Zhang Yuniang murmured. Guyan was also unwilling to let his sister leave him, and whispered, "Mom, what if it's true?" Zhang Yuniang's face was tangled for a while. After a long time, she took a deep breath and said, "If they have difficulties and are willing to make up for your sister, I agree to let them recognize this marriage. Of course, if they are not good to Niuniu, Zhang Yuniang will take the secret into the coffin." There were thousands of thoughts in his mind, and when he saw the two children, some of them were inevitably brought out. Gu Zhao's mind was not on homework. At this time, he tilted his head and looked at Zhang Yuniang for a long time before saying, "Mom, you look so strange, as if you had eaten 10 pounds of bitter fish gall." Zhang Yuniang looked at Niuniu carefully. Seeing that her daughter was still writing seriously, she sighed in her heart that Niuniu was well behaved, and then turned her head and glared at Gu Zhao. "Have you finished your homework? Your father will come back later and he will check it," Zhang Yuniang said. Gu Zhao hurriedly lowered his head. In the main courtyard, Li Yuanwei saw the old woman rushing in, and was frightened by this unknown creature with a strange head and tattered clothes. "What is it?" Li Yuanwei couldn't help but take 2 steps back. "Master, it's me," the old woman said vaguely. The master and servant gestured for a long time before Li Yuanwei realized that this thing was the person he sent to the guest house. "How did you get into this state?" Mr. Li couldn't help asking. When the old woman heard this, tears were about to fall. "I seem to be particularly unlucky today. In addition to falling a few times in the guest house, I didn't see clearly when I entered the threshold just now, and I tripped again." The old woman's head is now swollen, with either a bulging lump or a bleeding wound. She also has a limp in one leg and can't lift one of her arms. After the old woman finished complaining, she looked at Mr. Li eagerly, fearing that he would not admit it. Mr. Li was annoyed by her staring. It was only 1 or 2 silver coins, but he was still worried and asked again, "Are you sure that the little girl has no birthmarks?" The old woman nodded vigorously and said, "Master, I saw it clearly, 3 or 4 times." Mr. Li frowned when he saw her so confident, but still gave her 1 or 2 silver coins. The old woman could hardly hide the joy on her face after receiving the money, but as soon as she walked out of the main courtyard, her body could no longer bear it, and she fell headfirst to the ground, knocking her head heavily, and her eyes rolled up, and she lost consciousness. Gu Mingde went out this time and returned nearly 2 hours later. Zhang Yuniang saw him returning home with a damp body, and hurriedly took out a set of clean clothes, carefully wiped the water off his hair with a headscarf, and asked another old woman serving in the yard to get hot water. "Are the children still obedient?" Gu Mingde asked Zhang Yuniang. "A Zhao is still the same, always wanting to be lazy when doing homework, and I don't need to worry about a Yan and Niu Niu," Zhang Yuniang said. Gu Mingde suddenly grabbed her hand. "You are worried?" Zhang Yuniang wanted to wait until her husband took a bath before talking about it, but she didn't expect that she could not hide her slightest abnormality from her husband. Gu Mingde gently pulled his wife to sit down opposite. "Yuniang, what happened?" Zhang Yuniang threw herself into her husband's arms and told him everything that had happened before. "I have raised my daughter for a year. She is so obedient and cute. I really don't want to give her to others, but I am also afraid of delaying her." Zhang Yuniang couldn't help crying when she thought of this. Gu Mingde's hand gently patted his wife. "Yuniang, maybe things are not what you think. Don't scare yourself. We can all see how much Niuniu loves you, and she will not be willing to leave you." Zhang Yuniang forced a smile. Gu Mingde continued, "The Li family is not as simple as it seems on the surface." Zhang Yuniang instantly became energetic and asked, "What's wrong with their family?" Gu Mingde said, I went out to talk to Boss Jean before, and I went to the postman's house by the way. The postman is from the village, and his father is the village chief. Their family knows more about the village. Strictly speaking, Mr. Li's family is not considered a member of this village. Mr. Li's mother-in-law is the daughter of the Wang family in the village. At that time, the Wang family had too many children and could not make ends meet, so they sold their daughter to a trafficker. His mother-in-law was lucky. She was sold to a wealthy family in Guanglan Prefecture by a trafficker and assigned to serve the eldest daughter. I heard from the villagers that she was highly valued by the eldest daughter and went to the capital as a dowry. Later, she married a steward and gave birth to Mr. Li's wife. Mr. Li and his wife suddenly returned to the village 6 years ago. After returning to the village, they bought land and property. They seemed very wealthy. They have not returned to the capital in recent years. It seems that they want to be a rich man in the countryside. Zhang Yuniang felt strange when she heard these words. Gu Mingda lowered his voice and said, "The village chief's wife is in a similar situation to our father. They are both confused. But when I was at the village chief's house before, she suddenly said something." What did she say? Zhang Yuniang felt that it was very important. She said that Mr. Li and his wife came back with a baby, Gu Mingda said. Zhang Yuniang took a breath of cold air. Mr. Li and his wife came to the village 6 years ago. Nayuniu is now exactly 6 years old. This time node is too sensitive. But the village chief didn't let her continue to say this. Instead, he repeatedly emphasized to me that Mr. Li and his wife did not bring the child back, Gu Mingda said. Zhang Yuniang really wanted to know the truth at this time. Gu Mingda did not keep the secret and said, "I privately asked the postman for a long time and found out something. After Mr. Li and his family came to the village, they lived in seclusion and rarely interacted with the villagers, so they didn't know what people outside said about them. According to the postman, the villagers thought that Mr. Li's family's sudden prosperity was problematic, and even suspected that they had stolen the master's money, or that they sacrificed the child to the river god in exchange for their current good life." Zhang Yuniang was shocked. Sacrifice to the river god. When she heard this, she felt as if she hadn't woken up yet, and almost thought she had heard it wrong. First update. After Xiao Fubao's life was stolen, she became the favorite of the Beijing group. Author, Muyun Shenshen. Chapter 144. This area originally had the tradition of using boys and girls to sacrifice to the river god. 10 years ago, the current prime minister was demoted to this place as the county magistrate and strictly prohibited this practice. Therefore, few people have dared to openly sacrifice their lives in recent years. River god. I just heard from the postman that privately using boys and girls to sacrifice to the river god is not completely prohibited. As long as the desire for fame and fortune continues, this kind of foolish things will not stop. I guess that maybe in addition to the village chief's wife, other people in the village also saw Mr. Li and his wife coming back with their children, and some even saw them throwing the children into the river. That's why they came up with this theory, saying that they relied on he sacrificed his own children to get the property and land he has today. After hearing what Gu Mingda said, Zhang Yuniang's tears that had just stopped fell again. How can they bear with such a tiny little child? Zhang Yuniang said with emotion. Gu Mingda sighed and said, they may not have really abandoned the child, and the abandoned child may not be Nayuniu. Don't show your face when you meet the Li family in the past 2 days. It looks like it will rain for a while. I'll go back and test Mr. Li again. While the two were talking, another woman came in from the guest house carrying a large bucket of hot water. After Zhang Yuniang took the hot water, she asked casually, "Sister, why are you the only one in the yard? I saw another old sister before." When the old lady heard this, she immediately looked unhappy and said, "That old guy spends all day cheating and slipping. It's rare for him to do any work. He must have been injured. Now he asked her family to hire a doctor for her." I'm really addicted to pretending, and now I'm left with all the work. Zhang Yuniang didn't feel surprised when she thought about how the old woman had suffered a bloody head fall. But until the next day, there was still only one woman waiting in the guest house. The mother-in-law, who had a gloomy face before, now looks dazed. "What's wrong with you? Have you encountered any difficulty?" Zhang Yuniang asked softly. It was raining outside and they couldn't leave. Zhang Yuniang was still thinking about whether she could find a breakthrough point from the servants in the yard. The old woman looked pale and said, "That old guy, no, Mrs. Ding disappeared last night." "No more." Zhang Yuniang hasn't reacted yet. The old woman said, "I invited a doctor and prescribed medicine, but in the middle of the night, I suddenly vomited blood, and the person died after vomiting." Zhang Yuniang was so frightened that she took a step back. She was fine yesterday, why did she suddenly disappear after saying no? The woman's face was full of fear. Said, "Yeah, Mrs. Ding carried 3 buckets of hot water yesterday. It was really scary. I also carried hot water yesterday. Will I die suddenly like her? I'm so scared." Zhang Yuniang. An idea suddenly appeared in Zhang Yuniang's heart: murder and silence. But suddenly she felt that she was overthinking it. Mrs. Ding probably told Yuan Weili that Niu Niu had no birthmark. Yuan Weili realized that this was not the person she was looking for, and there was no need to attack Mrs. Ding. The most direct follow-up impact of Granny Ding's sudden death was that she had to pay extra money for anything she ordered in the guest house. Gu Mingde and his wife didn't care about the money. Instead, they thought it was a good thing. After all, this woman was so excited about money that she could get the news she wanted to know just by spending money. Zhang Yuniang took melon seeds, cakes and money to go to the old woman, and the two worked together for an afternoon on embroidery. The woman was a talker. She didn't even spend the money she brought. She just kept eating melon seeds and told everything about the master's family. "Do you think this family is strange? If his family hadn't hired many helpers from the village every month, the people in our village would have kicked them out long ago. The male master is weird. He spends his days either burning incense and worshipping Buddha, or inviting Taoist priests to come to his home to conduct a water and land dojo. He has done so many unscrupulous things. The mistress is not normal either. She lies in bed all day long, not caring much about her body. She is afraid that her husband will lose his popularity and give him many concubines. She spends her days worrying about this and that. Ask carefully. None of the children are her biological children. It's like her brain is broken. They have a lot of cheap sons and daughters, and all of them are sick. It's either this disease or that disease. That's it. This couple even invites the husband to sit in the restaurant, hoping that the number 1 scholar will come out. My sons can't speak clearly. They look just like the fools in the village. My husband has been teaching me for so many years and I still don't know a few words. I have so much money wasted, why can't you give it to me? I still can't give it to me thinking of him." Zhang Yuniang sat next to the mother-in-law, and she didn't even need her guidance. The mother-in-law said everything she should say and shouldn't. Gu Mingde was not idle either. He took Sun Jiaxing with him and met Li Yuanwei again. Mr. Li was thinking only about his son and said, "I wholeheartedly hope that my son will become a talented person. I am overjoyed when they improve academically, learn a few more words, and when my husband praises them." When Sun Jiaxing heard this, he felt emotional and said, "All girls here are debts. As long as they are born, they will have concerns in their hearts. Now in my heart, one end is concerned about longevity, and the other end is thinking about Niu Niu." Gu Mingde sighed and said, "Having your children by your side is already a great blessing in the world." Sun Jiaxing also knew about the Gu family and comforted him softly, "Zongde, you don't have to worry too much. Good people have their own destiny, and you will definitely find Xiao Er." Gu Mingde thought of his lost second son, and suddenly he didn't want to continue talking, but he still had a calm look on his face. Sun Jiaxing continued, I have a good friend whose only son has been missing for 10 years. He thought he had no hope in this life, but he didn't expect that one day when he went to Guanglin Mansion to relax, he happened to see a young man across the street. He was moved and went up to recognize his relatives. It turned out to be his lost only son. Zonged, maybe one day you can meet the second boy, and the father and son can sit together and ask him if he has been doing well these years. Listening to Sun Jiaxing's soft words, Gu Mingde forced a smile and forced himself to pay attention to Li Yuanhui's expression. Li Yuanhui's expression did not change at all, and his eyes did not fluctuate at all. Gu Mingde couldn't help but have an idea in his heart, Li Yuanhui and Niu Niu may not be related by blood. He looked carefully, and Niu Niu and Li Yuanhui did not seem to have any similarities. When he returned to his residence and heard his wife talk about the news he had learned today, Gu Mingde's idea became more and more firm. We don't need to ask how the Li family got their money. We'll leave when the rain stops. We shouldn't stay here for long, Gu Mingde said. What if the Li couple are really Niu Niu's biological parents? Zhang Yuniang was still a little confused. If it's true, then they probably sacrificed Niu Niu to the river god. Who would keep their lost child secret? They wouldn't even look for her? It's better for such a cruel family not to recognize her, Gu Mingde said. Zhang Yuniang nodded and said, Husband, although that's what you said, I still feel uncomfortable in my heart. I always feel that Mr. Li may have something to do with Niu Niu's life experience. Gu Mingde said seriously, now it can be confirmed that the couple threw the child into the river. If Niu Niu is not related to the Li couple by blood, but they are related, it means that they have a reason to kill Niu Niu. If they really recognize Niu Niu, will they kill her a second time? Second update. After Xiao Fubao's life was stolen, she became the favorite of the Beijing group. Author, Muyun Shenshen. Chapter 145. Everything related to the Li family now is speculation between the couple. But just a glimpse of the leopard has already given Gu Mingde an idea that cannot be explored further. Through this small Li's house, he seemed to be able to vaguely see something huge hidden behind him. He is too weak now. Compared with the truth, protecting his children from growing up safely is more important. The couple no longer had much involvement with the Li family. They focused on waiting for the rain to stop and continue their journey. It rained heavily for 3 consecutive days. Some people in raincoats made a special trip back to the post house to have a look. The place was already in a mess. No one dared to imagine what the situation would be like if they had still stayed in the post house. No one dared to question Sun Jiaxing's decision anymore. Lao Yuchen and the 2 postmen were grateful to him, and the caravan specially spent money to buy a banquet to apologize to Sun Jiaxing. These people were so enthusiastic that Sun Jiaxing said he was ashamed to Gu Mingde in private. This was all Niu Niu's credit, but now I take it Sun Jiaxing was not used to taking advantage of his children. Gu Mingde said, what if there is no accident at the post house? Brother Sun, Niu Niu is still a child. It is the most important thing for my wife and I that she can grow up safely and healthily. Sun Jiaxing heard this and said, every parent in the world is looking forward to this. On the 4th day, the heavy rain finally stopped. This group of people was in a hurry, and their luggage had been packed long ago. When the weather cleared, they set off immediately. As soon as the caravan left the village, a cry came from the Li family mansion at the end of the village. Axuan, Axuan, wake up. Mr. Li held his wife's body and cried bitterly, but no matter how much he shouted, the body of the person in his arms remained cold. Maybe after going through hardships, the road ahead becomes smoother. After traveling for nearly a month, we arrived at Zhangzhou Mansion without encountering any further setbacks. Zhangzhou Mansion is located in the south of the Yangtze River, and the words of passers-by have a unique charm. Niu Niu has never heard people talk like this. Sitting on the carriage, she slightly raised the curtain, her two little ears stood up, and she listened carefully to the couple outside. Sisters talk. Niuniu is so young, but she likes to hear people quarreling, Sun Jiaxing asked with a smile. Niu Niu's big eyes immediately widened and she said, "Are they quarreling? The sound of the quarrel is so nice. It's like singing." Sun Jiaxing touched the small knot on Niu Niu's head and said, "This is how Zhangzhou people speak. Even when they quarrel, it sounds as beautiful as singing. It is called Wunong soft language." This was the first time Niu Niu heard the statement, and she looked shocked. Gu Mingda stood aside, looking at his daughter tenderly, and said, "When you were in Guanglin Mansion last year, you found that the people there were very different from those in Guang'an County. Now that you have arrived in Zhangzhou Mansion, you have seen an even more different world. When you go there in the future, when you come to the capital, you can see different customs and customs." When Niu heard this, she clenched her fists immediately. "Dad, I will study hard." Sun Jiaxing looked on in shock. He didn't understand at all why he jumped to studying hard while talking. Although his biological child was just born, he had also taught his nephew and nephew. It was always difficult to persuade him to learn. How could Gu Mingda coax Niu to be so obedient with just a few words? He didn't know for a moment whether Gu Mingda had unique skills in persuading students to learn, or whether Niu was just too well behaved. But soon he couldn't think anymore. "Daddy son, what is the capital like?" Niu asked. Sun Jiaxing immediately began to organize the language. But the next second, Gu Zhao also came over. "Are the bugs in the capital different from those at home? What do they eat? Are they easy to feed?" Sun Jiaxing's eyes started to blur. Damn it, he came to Beijing to take the exam, not to catch bugs. How did he know there was anything different about the bugs in Beijing? The carriage entered a two-entry house amidst Sun Jiaxing's hesitation. "Brother Gu, this is the house my family bought here when I was taking the provincial examination in Zhangzhou Prefecture. You can live here with peace of mind. There is no need to look for another place," Sun Jiaxing said. "This house is very close to the Gongyuan where the exam is held, but the surrounding area is very quiet. The house is also very spacious, more than enough for two families. If Gu Mingda goes out to find a place to live by himself, he may not be able to find a better place than this." Gu Mingda did not refuse, but insisted on paying the rent. Sun Jiaxing didn't say no, and said, "Brother Gu, I have something to do when I go out now. I will talk about the money when I come back." Seeing that he was so easy to talk to, Gu Mingda felt relieved. Sun Jiaxing turned around and asked to take Niu out with him. They were all trustworthy people, so the Gu family naturally did not stop him. However, Gu Zhao wanted to follow him out, but Zhang Yuniang stopped him. "Your uncle's son cannot take care of two children by himself." Gu Zhao immediately said, "I'm not a child, I can take care of myself." Zhang Yuniang saw that this boy was not making any progress, so she directly enlarged her moves and turned to ask her eldest son, "Ian, has your brother finished his homework?" Gu Zhao rubbed oil on the soles of his feet on the spot, but Zhang Yuniang tightly pulled the back of Destiny's neck out. Niu was carried out by Sun Jiaxing and asked in a low voice, "Daddy son, where are we going?" Sun Jiaxing asked, "My dear, can I take you shopping?" Niu looked surprised and asked, "Daddy son, don't you have something to do?" Sun Jiaxing said without blinking, "What I want to do is go shopping with you." After saying this, Sun Jiaxing happily rushed towards the downtown with his daughter in his arms. His long-serving servant followed behind him and could not help shouting, "Master, please slow down. Don't make the young lady dizzy." Sun Jiaxing slowed down his pace a little when he heard this. When the father and daughter entered the downtown area, Sun Jiaxing was like a wild horse that had broken free from its reins. Everything he saw was new to him. He was even more excited than Niu, who was visiting Zhangzhou Prefecture for the first time. Wow, there is a little rabbit painted on this rattle. Guibao is born in the year of the rabbit. Buy, buy, buy. Niu Niu saw that Sun Jiaxing was about to pay, and hurriedly said, Uncle Sun, I am already a big kid, and I don't play with rattles anymore. But Sun Jiaxing took it away as if he didn't hear anything, and the long-serving servant behind him paid for it. I have never bought you a rattle before. This is the first rattle I bought for you, Sun Jiaxing explained to Niu Niu. Niu Niu's heart softened, and she reached out to take it, shook it twice, and listened to the unique dong-dong sound of the rattle. Seeing her like this, Sun Jiaxing said happily, I knew that Guibao would like it. I bought the right one. Niu Niu tilted her head and looked at him, and suddenly had a bad feeling in her heart. Wow, it's a windmill. It's a windmill. Sun Jiaxing was as excited as a child when he saw the colorful windmills on the roadside stalls. He picked up a windmill and ran around Niu Niu. Guibao, is the windmill beautiful? Niu Niu couldn't help but want to cover her face. Why did she feel that Grandpa Sun was more like a child than herself? Sun Jiaxing solemnly put the largest windmill on the stall in Niu Niu's hand. This is the first windmill I bought for Niu Niu. The long servant paid the money at a speed that Niu Niu couldn't stop. Wreath. Made of fresh flowers, fragrant and beautiful. Sun Jiaxing pulled his daughter and rushed to the side of the woman selling flowers. The woman was good at business, and took 2 wreaths, one large and one small, and handed them over on the spot. When Sun Jiaxing was the runner-up in high school, he once paraded through the streets wearing a wreath. Now, he naturally didn't think it was inappropriate for a man to wear a wreath, so he and Niu Niu each wore a wreath on their heads. Sun Jiaxing said proudly, with the wreath, our Niu Niu is the most beautiful girl on this street. First update. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. After Xiao Fubao's life was stolen, she became the favorite of the Beijing group. Author, Muyun Shen. Chapter 146. Sun Jiaxing actually had some hidden thoughts. They wore the same wreath, so that others could tell that they were father and daughter. Now, seeing Niu Niu wearing the wreath, tilting her head and smiling sweetly, Sun Jiaxing only regretted that he had no paintbrush and could not draw his daughter's extremely cute look. As they walked around, Niu Niu was covered with small things, and even the long-serving servant who followed her was carrying large and small bags. Sun Jiaxing saw the jewelry store not far away. His eyes turned, and he said, My dear, Daddy is tired, let me take you to a place for tea. Niu Niu didn't think much about it, and thought that Sun Jiaxing was going to take her to a tea house. But she didn't expect that Sun Jiaxing would directly pull her into the largest jewelry store on the street. As soon as Sun Jiaxing entered, he went straight to the second floor and asked casually, Are there any jewelry suitable for little girls? The people in the silver shop saw that he was well dressed and his demeanor and movements were also like a wealthy man. It turned out that the shopkeeper came to receive them in person. A cup of tea and a cup of Osman thus drink were served at the same time. Niu Niu took a sip and smiled and said to Sun Jiaxing, Sun Daddy, it's sweet, osmantha scented, delicious. Seeing her happy, Sun Jiaxing felt like he had drunk honey. Soon, the people from the silver shop came over with several small trays. Each tray contained jewelry suitable for children, including gold and jade. Sun Jiaxing liked the carp-shaped jade pendant at first sight, and after holding it around Niu Niu's waist for a while, he hung it directly on her. Niu Niu still wanted to refuse. This is the first jade pendant Daddy bought for you. Sun Jiaxing always pushed everything to the first. The long servant had already started handing out silver notes. Niu Niu saw that she couldn't refuse, so she jumped off the chair and ran outside. Anyway, she couldn't compete with Sun Jiaxing, so she might as well run away, so that he could spend less money. Unexpectedly, Sun Jiaxing behind her said loudly, "My daughter likes them all, buy them all." Niu took a step back and turned around, looking at Sun Jiaxing with an accusing look. "Uncle Sun is bullying me." Sun Jiaxing said cheerfully, "This is the first time that daddy takes you to buy jewelry, so I must buy all the ones you like." Niu has always been sensible. She knows that it costs a lot of money to come to such a place, so she said directly, "I don't like these jewelry." Sun Jiaxing is also single, then choose again. If you can't find a satisfactory one, let's buy them all. Niu widened her eyes and looked at him in disbelief. Sun Jiaxing's family is wealthy and he has never worried about money. After he passed the imperial examination, he was even more not short of money. I don't know how much private property the uncles and aunts in the clan who are doing business have added to him. Niu can't do anything to him, so she can only say, "Then I pick one I like, and we will leave here, okay?" 10. Sun Jiaxing stretched out his two hands. Niu shook her head, 3 at most. My mother said that things should never happen more than 3 times. Sun Jiaxing also took a step back, then 8, this number is auspicious. No. Too many. Niu shook her head like a rattle. Sun Jiaxing was unwilling to give in. Niu rolled her eyes and said, "Uncle Sun, if you are so unreasonable, I will be unreasonable too." Sun Jiaxing immediately became interested and asked, "My dear, you are still unreasonable sometimes, I want to see how you are unreasonable." Niu pursed her lips, walked slowly to the center of the room, then glanced at Sun Jiaxing and said, "Uncle Sun, I really want to be unreasonable." Niu's face was almost written with "Please stop me." Sun Jiaxing deliberately did not stop her, but asked, "Am I the first person who sees Niu being unreasonable?" Niu saw that he was not willing to listen, so she made up her mind and slowly sat on the ground, imitating Gu Zhao's usual noisy way, slapping the ground with her hands and feet, and shouting, "3. 3, just 3. Sun Jiaxing saw that the little girl's face was red with shame, and she looked like she wanted to find a crack in the ground to crawl into. He immediately stepped forward and picked her up, saying distressedly, okay, it's daddy's fault, our good baby will stop making trouble, okay?" Niu whispered, 3, don't spend money indiscriminately. Listening to the little girl's soft baby voice, Sun Jiaxing's heart was about to melt. Okay, daddy will listen to you. The people in the silver shop found the two people bargaining funny. They have only seen children crying and asking for things, but they have never seen children making trouble to prevent their parents from spending money. Sun Jiaxing said again, "My dear, the most important thing in life is to live in the present." Niu looked at Sun Jiaxing in confusion, not understanding why he suddenly said such profound words. Sun Jiaxing said again in words that a child could understand, "What you will buy later must be what you really like. You can't buy things you don't like just to save money." Niu opened her mouth and said after a long time, "Daddy Sun, a good child will not spend other people's money indiscriminately." Sun Jiaxing said, "I am not someone else, I am your father. Isn't it natural for a child to spend his own father's money? Do you want to disown me as your father?" How could Niu say anything better than an adult like Sun Jiaxing, who was also an adult who passed the imperial examination? "It's wrong to spend money indiscriminately," Niu said in a low voice. "Daddy's money, I'll let you spend it indiscriminately," Sun Jiaxing said generously. Niu really didn't know what to say this time. Sun Jiaxing knew how to defeat magic with magic, and deliberately said, "My dear, if you don't buy your favorite, I will learn from you. The place where you just sat is still hot, and daddy will also go and throw a tantrum and roll around." Niu looked at Sun Jiaxing, and when she thought of that scene, she felt that her hair was about to explode. "Sun daddy, you are a jinchi, you can't do such a shameful thing." Niu said. Sun Jiaxing said calmly, "It's okay, I don't care about face." The shameless Sun Jiaxing is almost invincible, and Niu dare not think of any tricks to save money, but rarely choose seriously. Sun Jiaxing's mouth curled up slightly, and said, "Spending money actually has rules. We spend money to buy the things we like most and make the people we like most happy. In this way, no matter how much money we spend, it is worth it." Niu listened very seriously, and she finally picked out 3 pieces of jewelry. Not the most expensive, nor the cheapest, but the ones she liked the most at first sight. "Uncle, do you have any hairpins for men?" Niu looked up and asked the shopkeeper of the silver shop. How could the silver shop not do business? Soon, a large number of trays were delivered. Niu carefully selected 4 hairpins. One for Uncle Sun, one for Daddy, one for Grandpa, and one for Big Brother. Niu counted on her fingers. Sun Jiaxing glanced at the long servant and gestured to pay the bill. Niu looked at him steadily, then dumped her small purse on the table and said with a swagger, "I have money." Second update. After Xiao Fubao's life was stolen, she became the favorite of the Beijing group. Author, Muyun Shen. Chapter 147. You said that we should live in the present, buy things we like, and spend money on people we like, Niu said. This really stumped Sun Jiaxing. After choosing men's hairpins, Niu also chose women's hairpins. She picked a gold hairpin for Zhang Yuniang, Gu Laotai, and Lu Ziru. She also bought Gu Zhao a gold pendant of his zodiac sign. Of course, after leaving the silver shop, Niu's purse was almost empty. Sun Jiaxing did not take her to continue shopping, but went to the final stop of the day, the government office. As soon as he arrived at the government office and stated his identity, someone immediately took him inside, obviously having greeted this place in advance. Niu was confused and asked, "Uncle Sun, is the person you want to see a certain adult?" Sun Jiaxing nodded. The two soon saw a middle-aged scholar who looked to be in his 40s and had a kind face. "Is it this little girl?" the middle-aged scholar asked Sun Jiaxing with a smile. Sun Jiaxing nodded, handed over a thin piece of paper, and folded his hands. "Thank you for your trouble." The middle-aged scholar picked up a pen and wrote on a piece of paper, and then asked someone to bring a big seal and printed it. The series of procedures were extremely cumbersome and took a lot of time. If it were an ordinary child, I'm afraid she would have been impatient long ago, but Niu has been waiting obediently by the side. When she was bored, she played with her fingers and didn't make any noise. After a long time, the middle-aged scholar finally stopped, exchanged a few words with Sun Jiaxing, and then handed a piece of paper with dry handwriting to Sun Jiaxing. Sun Jiaxing took Niu's hand and stood up to say goodbye. The middle-aged scholar smiled and watched the two leave. It was only when Niu returned home that she knew what Sun Jiaxing had done. After Gu Mingde took the thin piece of paper, he stood up on the spot. "Brother Sun, what are you doing?" Sun Jiaxing still looked calm and said, "As a father, I just want to give my daughter a little gift. She has already received a lot of care from you. How can she take another house in Zhangzhou Prefecture?" Gu Mingde felt that Sun Jiaxing was crazy. Now the two-story house where the Gu family settled in Zhangzhou Prefecture had just been changed by Sun Jiaxing in the government office and transferred to Niu's name. Sun Jiaxing said, "This matter was discussed with my wife before we set off. Since we recognize our daughter, we can't just recognize her with empty words. The two-story house in Zhangzhou Prefecture, which is close to the Imperial Examination Hall and the Confucius Temple, can be sold for at least 800 taels of silver if it is really sold." Gu Mingde shook his head. The gold collar was already very valuable. Sun Jiaxing said, "The gold collar is just a gift for meeting. The property you get is really heartfelt." He originally wanted to give some land, but he thought that Niu was still young and might not be able to take care of it. It would be more practical to give a house. Anyway, the house has been transferred. If you want to pay the rent, just give it to Nayuniu. I don't care. After Sun Jiaxing said this, he got up and left. Gu Mingda and Zhang Yuniang looked at each other, sighed, and said, "Brother Sun is generous. I don't know how to repay such a heavy favor." Zhang Yuniang seemed much calmer than him and asked, "Why do you always think about paying it back?" Gu Mingda was stunned. Zhang Yuniang smiled and said, "He really treats Nayuniu as his daughter. He gave gifts not because of us, but because of Nayuniu. This is actually Nayuniu's favor. How can a person as young as Nayuniu afford such a heavy gift?" Gu Mingda said. Nayuniu also nodded, with a bitter face, and said, "The house is so expensive, Nayuniu may not be able to pay it back even if we sell it." Zhang Yuniang patted her little head and said, "He gave you the house, not for you to repay the favor." Nayuniu tilted her head when she heard it. Zhang Yuniang continued, "My dear, he hopes that you can really become his daughter. You must be filial to Grandpa Sun in the future, understand?" Nayuniu nodded and said, "I know, he is also my family." Zhang Yuniang also understood the slight awkwardness in Gu Mingda's heart, and said softly, "Husband, it is also good for us to have more people love Nayuniu. We treat the Sun family as close relatives, so that we will not let him down." Gu Mingda sighed. Sun Jiaxing treated Nayuniu too well, which aroused his fighting spirit. He had to find a way to become better, so that he could keep his position in Nayuniu's heart. After dealing with the real estate, Sun Jiaxing stayed in Zhangzhou Prefecture for another 2 days and returned home. Before leaving, he tried to persuade Nayuniu to stay with the Sun family for a while, and the Gu family was willing to do so, but Nayuniu refused. "Uncle Sun, I will come to you and my godmother after my father finishes the exam," Nayuniu promised seriously. Sun Jiaxing stretched out his hand, "Pin, whoever doesn't go is a puppy." 5-year-old Nayuniu thought that Pinky was very formal, but 6-year-old Nayuniu only thought that Pinky was a child's play. She looked like, "I can't do anything about you at this time," and said, "Since Pinky is very important to Uncle Sun, Nayuniu will Pinky with Uncle Sunday." Sun Jiaxing chuckled and said, "Good boy, you have worked hard." After Pinky, Sun Jiaxing still looked back every few steps when he stepped on the carriage, and kept confirming with Nayuniu, "You must go. You can't lie to me." Nayuniu nodded and promised tirelessly. After Sun Jiaxing left, the whole house seemed to be quiet. Gu Mingda's provincial examination was approaching, and the children did not need to be reminded by adults, nor would they make any noise. 2 days later, Gu Mingda got up before dawn on a morning. The provincial examination was divided into 3 sessions and lasted for 9 days. Unlike the twists and turns of the last scholar examination, this provincial examination went surprisingly smoothly. There was no sudden stumbling block, nor a basin of dirty water falling from the sky. There was no twists and turns on the way from the house to the Imperial Examination Hall. Even when Gu Mingda just walked to the entrance of the Imperial Examination Hall, he didn't have to wait outside like other candidates. The gate of the Imperial Examination Hall opened when he lined up. The inspection process was also very smooth. As soon as he entered, he was assigned to a normal examination position. Even so, Gu Mingda still didn't dare to take it lightly. He was still extremely cautious. If there is anything different about this exam, that is the test questions. The test questions of this provincial examination were very biased, as if an old scholar who had lived for 80 or 90 years old had searched out the questions from the corners. He vented all his life's misfortunes on this provincial examination, just to retaliate against the students. Gu Mingda carried the exam basket and walked out of the exam room with a tired face. The complaints of the candidates were all around him. Gu Mingda's shoulder was suddenly patted by someone. It turned out to be Zheng Qi, who passed the exam with him last time. "Brother Gu, I'm afraid I'm in trouble this time. I didn't do well in the classics and policy essays. I only wrote the poem. Now is the season when the chrysanthemums are fragrant. I write about chrysanthemums as if I were assisted by God, Zheng Qi said with a bitter face. Gu Mingde frowned slightly and said, the poem is about yellow flowers, and you wrote chrysanthemums. Zheng Qi nodded vigorously. Gu Mingde sighed and said, the lonely branches are half yellow, although the question describes the loneliness, it is not about chrysanthemums, but rape flowers. Zheng Qi was struck by lightning. What? The only question I answered well was wrong from the beginning. First update. After Xiao Fubao's life was stolen, she became the favorite of the Beijing group. Author, Muyun Shen. Chapter 148. While Zheng Qi was yelling, Gu Mingde was also very scared. This poem that serves as the title is considered an off-the-beaten-path poem, and most of the candidates taking the exam may not have read it. Gu Mingde didn't know it at first. Books are expensive, and the Gu family doesn't have many. However, the Luo family has been a scholarly family for several generations and has a large collection of books. 3 months ago, Niu accidentally opened a book of poems in the Luo family library. Because she didn't understand something, Luo Zhang and Guyan couldn't explain it. The husband of the Luo family didn't pay attention to Niu, so Niu borrowed it. Go home and ask Gu Mingde. After Gu Mingde explained his daughter's doubts, he flipped through it and accidentally saw this poem. Because he had read the whole poem, the title of the poem also clearly read cauliflower. Gu Mingde just casually sighed that it was interesting, but he didn't take it too seriously. When he saw this poem again in the examination room today, he suddenly felt a sense of fate that everything was doomed, and he had a vague premonition that he would win the exam. After the rural examination is over, there is a half-month wait. Some scholars have returned home early because they felt they did poorly in the exam, such as Zheng Qi, who answered almost every question on point. Gu Mingde was relatively relaxed. He finally had time to check the homework of several children. This inspection directly poked a hornet's nest. Guyan was excellent as always, Niu also performed normally, only Gu Zhao. On the day Gu Zhao was beaten, people in the entire alley could hear his cries. Gu Mingde is not the kind of parent who likes to spank his children, but Gu Zhao's academic performance is so bad that it drives people crazy. Grandpa, grandma, mother, brothers, and sisters, please save me. When Gu Zhao was being beaten, he shouted to everyone who could ask for help. Zhang Yuniang thought he was noisy, so she walked over with a feather duster, turned into a mixed doubles, and slapped Gu Zhao's mouth shut. Azao has been fooling himself too much these days. Guyan didn't have a good look on this lazy brother. Niu looked at the beaten third brother with distress. She also knew that her parents were doing it for Gu Zhao's good. When Gu Zhao's beating was over, Niu gave Gu Zhao all the snacks she had saved. While Gu Zhao was eating, he was so moved that his face was covered with tears and snot. Niu, you are the only one who treats your brother sincerely. It hurts so much. Niu actually didn't quite understand and said, third brother, the opportunity to study is very precious. Sister Ya and Sister Ya can't even want to study now. Why don't you like it? Gu Zhao said, I feel dizzy when I see those words. I don't like it. Niu sighed and said, but if you don't study, your parents will keep beating you. Gu Zhao sighed heavily, hey, it's so hard to be a child. As the two closest children in the family, they went to school and played together and stayed together for the longest time. Niu didn't want to see Gu Zhao get beaten all the time. She tilted her head and said, is there any way for you to read well so that you don't have to be beaten? Gu Zhao shook his head, I feel dizzy when I read the book. When I do my homework, I feel like there are ants biting me all over my body. I can't sit down. Niu stretched out her hand to scratch her head and felt extremely embarrassed when she looked at Gu Zhao. How can I make you like reading and doing homework? Niu tilted her head and thought seriously. Gu Zhao, who was the party involved, said, "Baby, don't think about it. I may not be born to study. In the future, my eldest brother will take the imperial examination and become an official. You have a house in the city. Then you can find a husband from the city. I will go back. Qingshui village is farming and will send you some fruits and vegetables every now and then." Gu Zhao thought like this and actually started planning seriously. "I'll set aside an acre of land just for you to grow ginger. Then you won't have to spend money to buy it. My eldest brother likes to eat oranges, so I'll be there in front of and behind the house, plant it and make sure he eats it until he vomits. I can also build a small room specifically for raising bugs, and then marry a wife who loves bugs as much as I do. How wonderful my life will be." In his fantasy, Gu Zhao actually had the illusion that he did not need to study at all in his life. After hearing this, Niuniu murmured in a low voice, "Changzi, third brother, you really like insects." Gu Zhao smiled hee and said, "They are my friends." A flash of inspiration flashed in Niuniu's mind. "I like reading poetry, so I am happier when I see poetry collections than those classics and meanings. I will also look for poetry collections everywhere by myself." Gu Zhao was confused, but he still said grandly, "Don't worry, my dear, if I see a collection of poems when I go out, I will persuade my parents to buy them for you." As for why he persuaded his parents to buy it instead of buying it for Niuniu, of course it was because he had no money. Niuniu shook her head and said, "Brother, what I mean is that you can read books about insects and write big characters about them. For example, when you see the word worm, what do you think of? If you can't write what you like, will you feel uncomfortable?" When Gu Zhao heard this, his face really showed a thoughtful expression. People do tend to prefer things they like. When he thought about it carefully, he found that he really liked writing some words. When he first read about crickets in a miscellaneous journal, he read it over and over again several times. "But Dad is still looking forward to my imperial examination." Gu Zhao was crestfallen again. When he thought about having to study hard like his dad and Gu Yan, he felt that his future was gloomy. Niuniu was not a person who only knew how to be depressed. She stood up and said, "I'll go ask Daddy." "Don't go, or Daddy will beat you too," Gu Zhao shouted behind him. But Niuniu had already run away with a da-da-da sound. Gu Mingda was reading in the study room. When he saw his daughter running over, he couldn't stop smiling and hugged her in his arms. "Dad, are you looking forward to my third brother taking the imperial examination?" Niuniu asked crisply. Gu Mingda was stunned when he heard this and said, 2 or 3 years ago, I still had this dream about him. Now I just hope he won't get angry to death." Niuniu looked at him blankly and couldn't help asking, "Then why does Daddy still force my third brother to do his homework? He doesn't like to study." Gu Mingda didn't hide anything from his daughter and said, "If he can recognize a few more words, he can find an easy job in the future, or work as a clerk in the government office, or work as an accountant for others, and he can be considered to be able to make a living." "Can't my third brother farm?" Niuniu was puzzled. Gu Mingda shook his head, "Farming is too hard, he may not be able to bear this hardship." "But the third brother likes insects, he wants to farm in the future." Niuniu told Gu Zhao's idea. Gu Mingda frowned and said, "He is too young. If he is really asked to farm every day, I am afraid he will make more trouble than anyone else." Niuniu thought that her father was the most powerful person in the world, so she asked, "Dad, is there any business that can let the third brother play with insects and earn money to support the family, and it is not tiring?" You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. After Xiao Fubao's life was stolen, she became the favorite of the Beijing group. Author, Muyun Shenshen. Chapter 149. Gu Mingda listened to this and thought, if there is such a good thing, who would not want to do it? but he took it to heart and sat there thinking hard. Insects, who would like to study insects? Gu Mingde whispered softly. Niu Niu nestled in his arms, flipped through the book of songs on the table, and read in a low voice, Bingbai, Dad, I don't recognize this word. Gu Mingde stopped thinking, looked at his daughter's ashamed face, lowered his head, took the book, and smiled and read, Bingbai Maze, Fubi Yanhuo, means to use the nature of insects who like light at night, light a fire at night, and cause the insects to burn themselves. Niu Niu frowned, very confused, and said, although it's just an insect, why want to kill for no reason? Gu Mingde explained, the insects in this poem refer to locusts. There was a locust plague 2 years ago. Those locusts would eat everything they saw. Many old and weak people died in the locust plague because of lack of food. Niu said, I remember. 2 years ago, Niu was very hungry every day. Gu Mingde looked at his daughter distressedly and said, don't worry, my dear, it's all over. You won't be hungry in the future. After saying this, Gu Mingde suddenly realized something. The saints value agriculture and sericulture. If we can guide him to be familiar with insects and use them in farming, it may be a way, Gu Mingde said. Niu raised her head and asked, are there many books about insects in farming? Third brother only likes to read books related to insects. Gu Mingde shook his head and said, there are not many records related to insects in farming. Where are there many? Niu asked. Gu Mingde followed his daughter's line of thought and continued to think deeply. Now Gu Zhao's biggest problem is that he doesn't like to study. He can't recognize many words, so he can't be an agricultural official. He has to focus on what he is interested in, so that he can at least get rid of his illiteracy. Where are insects most useful? Niu tilted her head and said, am I too stupid? I can't think of any use for insects. Many insects can be used as medicine. Gu Mingde's eyes lit up. Gu Zhao didn't expect that he suddenly didn't have to read classics, history, and collections, but was instead stuffed with a bunch of pharmacopoeias. Gu Mingde even marked the pages related to insects separately. Gu Zhao's practice of writing big characters is also all related to insects. With this method, Gu Zhao's resistance to reading and writing is indeed not so strong. Time passed quickly. The 3 children were well behaved, and even Gu Zhao was studying and writing seriously. Zhang Yuniang felt that there would never be such a carefree and fairy-like life again. That day, the whole family got up early again and went to the government office of Zhangzhou Prefecture in new clothes. On the day of the announcement of the results, the government office is always very lively. Now that the red list has not been posted yet, many people have brought their own small stools and sat waiting under the list. Since the beginning of the son-in-law hunting under the list, it has not started from the imperial examination in Beijing. Many local wealthy families have sent people to wait outside the provincial examination for the candidates who have passed the imperial examination. When Gu Mingde first appeared, there were still many servants from wealthy families. After seeing his elegant demeanor, they observed him for a long time. When Zhang Yuniang, who was a few steps behind him, appeared with her children, these people could only give up such a potential stock on the spot. The roadside tea house was already full of people, and there was not even a vacant seat left. Fortunately, the Gu family had prepared it in advance. Gu Mingde put down the small stool in his hand. Don't run around. I saw a peddler carrying a pole to sell cakes. I'll go buy some, Gu Mingde told the 3 children. Gu Yan had a calm face, quite like an elder brother, and stretched out a hand to hold down the restless Gu Zhao. Niu nodded obediently and also stretched out a hand to hold Gu Zhao. Zhang Yuniang was nervous and took her daughter into her arms. I don't know if your father can pass the exam this time. Regardless of whether Gu Mingde can pass the exam this time, the family will move to the capital and look for their second son in Beijing. But if he fails, Gu Mingde will have to rush back from the capital for the next provincial exam. It will be hard to travel back and forth. Mom, we have to believe in Dad. Na Yuniu's small hand clapped on Zhang Yuniang's palm. Zhang Yuniang forced a smile on her face, but her anxiety was not relieved at all. After Gu Mingde came with a box of various pastries, he took out the brown sugar cake inside and handed it to Zhang Yuniang. You like it? This is the snow cloud pastry that Na Yuniu likes to eat, this is what a Yan likes to eat, and this is what a Zhao likes to eat. Gu Mingde clearly remembered everyone's hobbies and tried his best to ensure that everyone got their favorite ones. Gu Mingde picked up a piece of the remaining unpleasant pastries and ate them slowly. Dad, if you pass the exam this time, what will you reward us with? Gu Zhao asked naively, tilting his head. Gu Mingde chuckled and said, I have to reward you if I pass the exam. Shouldn't you reward me? Gu Zhao quickly covered his purse. Dad, you are bullying a child, I have no money. Niu Niu suddenly jumped down from Zhang Yuniang's arms and threw herself on Gu Mingde. Dad, Niu Niu still has some money, what do you want? Niu Niu will buy it for you. Compared with his well-behaved and lovely daughter, Gu Mingde looked at Gu Zhao and felt that he had to compare the goods. He reached out and touched the hairpin on his head, saying, the hairpin Niu Niu gave is already very good, Dad, I don't have anything special for the time being. Niu Niu looked regretful and said, Dad, why doesn't he have anything he wants? She seemed to feel regretful because she couldn't give a gift. Gu Mingde gently tapped his daughter's head and said, my little fool, why are you thinking about spending money now? Zhang Yuniang taught Na Yuniu how to spend money, and Lu Xiru and Sun Jiaxing taught Na Yuniu how to spend money for the people she likes. Being able to spend money on the people you like is something that makes Na Yuniu feel warm all over. Na Yuniu said happily with her little face raised. Gu Mingde was so soft-hearted that he was about to say something when the crowd suddenly became agitated. The results are out. The results are out. Don't squeeze me. Who stepped on my feet? Did I pass the imperial examination? The messy voices around poured into the ears of the Gu family. Gu Mingde immediately protected Zhang Yuniang and the children. Not only did he not squeeze forward, but he also took people back. Fortunately, the place where they sat was far away from the red list, and now they took a few steps back, finally completely away from the crowded crowd. Husband, I'll take care of the children, you go in and take a look. Zhang Yuniang urged Gu Mingde to look at the list. Gu Mingde shook his head, it doesn't matter whether you see it earlier or later. I passed, I passed. A man in his 40s squeezed out of the crowd and jumped 3 feet high. Even though his hair was messy and his clothes were torn in several places, he looked crazy. The eyes of people around him were still full of envy. Isn't it for this day that we have studied hard for decades? Juren can already be selected as an official. Becoming an official means changing the family, and the whole family can soar to the sky. Gu Mingde? This year's champion is Gu Mingde. He is from Guang'an County, someone in the crowd shouted. First update. After Xiao Fubao's life was stolen, she became the favorite of the Beijing group. Author, Muyun Shenshen. Chapter 150. Jiwen ranked first in the provincial examination. The Gu family members stood outside the crowd. After hearing this, they all looked at Gu Mingde. My dad is number 1, Niu Niu said excitedly. Zhang Yuniang wiped the tears from her face. My husband has been known as a child prodigy since he was young, but he was just a child for most of the first half of his life. There were many rumors from the outside world, some said that he lived up to his reputation, some said that he hurt Zhonyang, but the husband never showed any emotion. But Zhang Yuniang knew in her heart how could he not be touched at all. Now that she is a high school student, Zhang Yuniang only feels that all the hardships have come to an end, and her husband no longer has to be harassed by any rumors. Gu Mingde stood there, but he was a little dazed. He thought that he might be able to go to high school, but he never thought that he would be the first place. After a long time, he seemed to have calmed down and said to Zhang Yuniang, go back. The official will go home to send you a message soon. If there is no one at home, I'm afraid they will be disappointed. Zhang Yuniang nodded and said, I prepared the good news purse early in the morning. Now that I have won the first place, I have to make it 20% thicker. Just as they were about to leave, an acquaintance recognized Gu Mingde. Brother Gu, congratulations. Brother Gu has already become a blockbuster without even saying a word. He is actually a senior high school student, which is admirable. The acquaintance grabbed Gu Mingde. When the people around him heard this, they all immediately gathered around him, regardless of whether they recognized him or not. Compliments and praises were heard endlessly. A group of people praised Gu Mingde to the highest level, and gathered around to treat him to dinner and drinks. If it were a young and shallow-minded person, he would probably be upset when seeing this situation, but Gu Mingde is no longer young. He bowed his hands apologetically to the scholars beside him and said, Sorry, I have something to do at home, so I'm afraid I won't be free today. The acquaintance held him tight and said, Brother Gu, I have been named on the gold list and won the Toad Palace. What else is more important at home now than celebrating high school? Are you saying this as an excuse? It's a great day today, so don't let it spoil the fun. Gu Mingde frowned, feeling in his heart that the man in front of him was very annoying, but he also knew that if he showed a cold face now, he was afraid that if he turned around, these people would spread the word that he was arrogant. Dad, did you agree to go back and tell me the story of Yan Teju? How can you break your promise? Niu Niu suddenly said. Gu Mingde was worried and didn't know how to excuse himself, so he immediately picked up Niu Niu, looked at an acquaintance, and said, I'm really sorry, my daughter is in a hurry, I have to go back. But the acquaintance still held him and said, How can you take what a child says seriously? Brother Gu, it's just a story. It doesn't matter if you wait a few more days. Niu Niu asked in a coquettish voice from the side, Dad, you told me the story of Wei Sheng holding the pillar before, can you tell it again? Gu Mingde immediately looked awakened after hearing this, and told the other scholars present with a look of shame, Wei Sheng died keeping his promise. If I break my promise to a child today, it will be in vain that I have read the books of sages for so many years, and I am not worthy the three-word scholar. Gu Mingde deliberately pulled the banner and said it was serious, but the group of scholars around him heard this and couldn't persuade him anymore. It's just that after the Gu family leaves, someone will inevitably say a few harsh words. Gu Jiwen looks down on us. He can be proud for a while, but he may not be proud for the rest of his life. With such an unsociable and only dedicated to studying, even if I become an official in the future, I'm afraid I won't be able to do it for a long time. The Gu family didn't know what was going on behind the scenes. At this time, Zhang Yuniang said softly, MS Sir, you have been studying hard for months, and you should relax quickly. Even if you go to have a few drinks with them, it doesn't matter. Gu Mingde shook his head and said, Yun Niang, do you still remember Chen Sanlang? Zhang Yuniang nodded. Chen Sanlang was Gu Mingde's former classmate. He was very knowledgeable. Unlike Gu Mingde's difficult road to the examination, Chen Sanlang passed both the boy student and scholar examinations in one go. He came in third in the scholar examination. At that time, everyone in the private school, including their teachers, felt that Chen Sanlang would be able to pass the examination sooner or later. Unexpectedly, not long after he was admitted as a scholar, Chen Sanlang seemed to have changed. The reason was just that after the results of the college examination were announced, he was coaxed into participating in a drinking party. At first, I thought it was just drinking. I was young and proud, and indulged occasionally. No one thought it was a big deal. But those booing people took him to drink, to admire the wind and the moon, to hang out in the Qin Tower and the Chu Pavilion, and to the gambling den to bet on life and death. He could not go back, and he could no longer concentrate on studying. To this day, he is still confused. Hearing what Gu Mingde said, Zhang Yuniang was so scared that she covered her heart and said, "Did these people do this on purpose?" Gu Mingde nodded lightly and said, "Every time outside the scientific examination room, there are always people like this. They fail the exam themselves and don't want others to pass the exam, so they will deliberately try their best to drag others into the abyss. If they were making friends normally, they wouldn't be so persistent if others didn't go with them. This group of people didn't hide their good intentions and would naturally try their best to pull people into trouble." Zhang Yuniang looked at Nai Yuniu on the side and said, "We have to find a way, otherwise your father wouldn't be able to get away so easily." Niu Niu smiled and said, "I have been looking at Daddy." Daddy frowned, obviously he doesn't like those people. Gu Mingde touched her little head and said, "I will continue to tell you the story of Taizhi Yan when I get back." Nayunia was so happy that she almost jumped up and said, "Daddy is the best." Not long after the Gu family returned to the house, an official came with the good news. The auspicious words were so generous that Zhang Yuniang gave him a lot of money. Gu Mingde did not intend to stay in Zhangzhou prefecture for a long time. After attending the banquet organized by the government, he waited for a few more days until a caravan passed through Guang'an County, and then he set off to return home. Gu Mingde did not deliberately avoid it when he returned home, but perhaps it was God's will. The caravan he followed this time still chose to rest in the village where Li Yuanwei was. It was just that the village was not as hospitable as before. The villagers all looked wandering and looked panicked. They even disagreed with the caravan's request to stay overnight. Even though the caravan raised the price several times. "Hurry up and leave. Our village does not allow passers-by to stay overnight," the old village chief came out to drive them away. It was the first time for the caravan leader to encounter such a situation. "It's getting late. If we miss this village, we'll have to sleep in the wilderness," the leader said with a sad face. "The weather is getting colder day by day. These people are tired from traveling by boat and car. If they can't rest well, they will easily catch a cold." Gu Mingde jumped off the carriage, walked in front of the crowd, and said to the village chief, "Village chief, it's me, Gu Zioki, do you remember? We stayed here last time." When the village chief saw Gu Mingde, his eyes softened a little, and then asked, "Gu Zioki, did you pass the provincial examination in Zhangzhou prefecture?" Before Gu Mingde answered, the leader of the caravan next to him said, "Village chief, Mr. Gu passed the provincial examination and won the first place." The village chief showed a look of joy on his face. After a moment of silence, he asked, "Mr. Gu, I just want to ask you one question, is this caravan with you a legitimate caravan?" The second update.